Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Those of you who work right across education, I was really keen to have an early opportunity to take questions and to speak with you directly on my now 12th day in the job. So thank you to all of you for joining. This is hopefully the first of many opportunities that we'll have, both online and face-to-face and right across our country, to discuss the important issues that matter to you and that also are central to the work that we'll be doing here from the Department for Education. I appreciate the time won't work for everyone, but we will try and make sure that there are a range of opportunities at different times so that we can hear from people working right across all of our education workforces. Please do use the Q&A function to put questions there that I can answer. And with that, I'll hand over to Ed.
Hi there, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us in the sector. My name's Ed Van Care from the Reach Foundation. I work in Feltham and beyond with leaders and schools, supporting them to develop kind of cradle to career models. And I'm going to kind of moderate today. So as the Secretary of State said, please post your questions in the chat and please like the questions that you'd like to see asked. We'll try and answer as many as we can over the course of this. We won't have time to get through all of them. But I do know that officials from the department will be reading all of these and will be taking your feedback on board to inform their thinking. So congratulations, we're 12 days in. Tell us what it's like to be in this role. Is it as you expected? Tell us about the role.
So I was absolutely delighted to be appointed as Secretary of State for Education. It still feels a bit strange not to say shadow the first time I introduced myself to everyone. This is such an important role. It means such a great deal to me to be leading on this absolutely central part of the work of government. We're also going to lead on the government's opportunity mission, which is about breaking down the barriers to opportunity that hold too many people back across our country. So I know there are lots of challenges that people are facing at the moment. We face some tough choices ahead, but I think there are some really exciting opportunities where if we work together, we can start to make progress. And that's why one of the first things that I did was to write out our education workforces and to make clear that we will have to do this together in partnership, and I'm determined to reset that relationship so we get better life chances for our children, which I know is what we all want to focus on.
100%, absolutely, and it's been great to have that kind of connection, and events like this really help with that. Can you talk a little bit about your own kind of journey through education, your own path, and why this role is so important to you?
So I grew up in the northeast of England, in Washington, in the 80s and 90s, in a council street, brought up by my mum, who brought me up on her own, and it was quite tough at that point. Lots of families had a really hard time of it. My family really valued and prized education, and that was really important for us. But alongside that, I was so fortunate to go to brilliant local state schools, and the amazing staff there supported me right along the way. And I know that's what people do every day. That's what brings people into education, to make sure that children have better life chances. I'm so grateful for the support that they gave me, and I want that for all children, not just for a lucky few. And you know, I've been able to speak with some of the people that supported me along the way, and it's, you know, it means so much to me that they kind of continue to support such a broad range of young people. And I'm determined that background is no barrier for our young people. No matter where you're from, no matter what your family background, you have every chance to thrive and to flourish.
Fantastic. And one of the challenges, as you know, that we're facing in the sector at the moment is around kind of school attendance.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think a lot of us are thinking about is how can we create a really rich, enjoyable experience of being in school. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were at school? Like, what were the things that you loved? What made you excited to go into school? Was it lessons? Was it extracurricular stuff? What kind of brought school to life for you?
So I really enjoyed school. I loved going to school. But what also made it special was all of the wider opportunities that the school delivered, whether that was taking part in the choir. I used to play the violin. There's also one teacher I've talked about quite a lot, Miss Hack, who is my languages teacher, my Spanish teacher. There's also one teacher I've talked rugby team set up the first ever girls rugby team in our school. She did that in her own time. We travelled around the northeast. It gave us experiences and understanding that we just wouldn't have otherwise had. And I know that people right across our education workforce and understanding that we just wouldn't have otherwise make that impact. And I know that there's also a wider point about how we ensure that through our process of curriculum assessment review, we'll set out more around that, so that we make sure we've got that breadth. High and rising standards in our schools, a really strong academic underpinning, but that breadth so that all of our young people have a range of opportunities.
I think one of the things that feels like we've had is a very kind of quite a polarized system and quite a binary system where you're either for outcomes or you're for the experience children are having, you're either for rigor or you're for relationships. And I think what I detect from the way that you talk about this is that we can have a both and system. We can have great standards, but we can also have that really rich experience for young people. We can have rigor in our classrooms, but we can also have really strong relationships in our communities with our families. And so, yeah, that feels really exciting. One of the things that is going to be top of mind for lots of people in the audience is around kind of pay and funding and funding across the sector, really. Can you give us an update on kind of where you are, recognising you're 12 days into the role?
Yeah, I think people understand the scale of the inheritance, and as Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has set out, this is the toughest fiscal inheritance since the Second World War. So we know it's really tough, and I recognise the pressures right across education in terms of what people are experiencing. The commitment that I've given is I want to work in partnership with our workforces, with the sector, to rebuild those relationships. And part of that has to be being honest and upfront about where we are. So just to be absolutely clear, I'm afraid that we won't be able to confirm the Teacher Pay Award this week. I know that is frustrating. We know there's an urgency around that, and we're working across government to act as quickly as we can. And alongside that, we won't be able to provide indicative school and high needs national funding formula allocations for 25-26 to the usual timescales. Again, I understand the challenges that presents, but we're doing our best to move as quickly as we can. I would also say we will be writing out, just to confirm this, tomorrow to local authorities and to academies. But I do just want to, I want to start in the spirit that I intend to proceed, which is being honest and levelling with people, whilst recognising I appreciate there is an urgency around that.
I think everyone will really appreciate your transparency. So I think we all feel really confident that you're advocating for the sector, advocating for young people. We recognise there's this complexity across government, but we can see we've got a real champion. So we're really grateful for that. Can you talk about coming into the role? Like, what are your initial priorities? Yeah. Like, what comes first? What's the number one on your list? Number two on your list? What do you want to get done early?
So I think firstly, and most importantly, and the reason I did this straight away, is that reset in the relationship, because I know unless we've got really strong relationships working with staff across education, then we're not going to achieve and deliver the better life chances for children and expanded opportunities for our adult learners as well. So starting when our children are youngest, which is a really big priority for me, I'm determined to deliver more nursery classes across our system, because it is so important that we make better progress when our children are younger so that they're set up to succeed. We know that there's a major challenge when it comes to teacher recruitment and retention, and I'm determined to deliver on our commitment around 6,500 new expert teachers. But I do recognise the retention challenges that are there, and my belief has always been that your best recruitment strategy is a strong retention strategy, and I appreciate the workload pressures that people are facing at the moment. Where it comes to skills, where we've got a really big and ambitious agenda, we'll move as quickly as we can to establish Skills England, which will drive forward our work across government, making sure that not only have we got great opportunities for our young people right across our economy, we're connecting that into industrial strategy, providing opportunities for reskilling opportunities for adults too. That will involve working with our employers, with FE colleges, with providers and unions to make sure we get that right, so that we can not just respond to the challenges and the gaps, but also be at the forefront of so much of the way in which we will have new technologies and new jobs that will emerge as we make that transition around climate change. And finally, I know that there are pressures at the moment within the higher education sector. I'm determined to secure the future success of our institutions and to make sure that universities are once more recognised as the public good that they are, the engines of growth in our communities, in our regions and right across the country, no longer treated as a political battleground, but recognising the important contribution that I think colleges and universities can also have if they work together, particularly responding to local skills needs.
Mm-hmm. It's quite an inbox.
It's quite a lot. There's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do. And so can you talk a little bit about what you need from all of us? We want lives of choice and opportunity for our young people. What do you need from all of us in the system? What's your ask to us?
Yeah, I think I sense that there is a real a real willingness to work together on some of these big shared challenges that we face. I know that there will be ups and downs along the way. There will be times where we don't always agree, where there are different pressures and we as politicians have to confront some challenges. But I think what really matters to me is getting off on the right foot and making sure we've got those relationships, that we can be honest and upfront. And I just want to be clear as well, this goes back to your earlier point about, do you accept that that high academic standards and breadth ought to be in conflict? And I don't think they ought to be in conflict, but equally, whilst we have lots of commitments that we have set out, new areas where we want to make progress, I appreciate that there is lots going on out there right across education that's working really well. And I want to build on that and strengthen it. And I want to listen to and engage with people who have expertise right across the board, whether that's in early years, whether it's that social workforce. And I know that there are some really big challenges also around children's social care and SEND, and I imagine we'll come on to that.
I'm sure we will. And a huge thank you. We've already had over 1,000 questions, so I'm just going to ask one more and then we'll get into some questions from our audience. One of the things one of the challenges that we're all facing in the system is working with more and more children who are living in acute poverty. And we've got, as you've talked about, this kind of mission-led government around a focus on opportunity, a focus on opportunities for every child. Can you talk about the impact of poverty on that and what we can do as a system to alleviate that impact so that we can make sure those opportunities are available to all?
So I completely recognise that, and of the many schools and colleges and early year settings in particular I've visited in my time from opposition and now into government, I've heard directly from so many school leaders and support staff and teachers about the pressures that are there. And I know people are doing their absolute best, whether it's washing children's clothes, providing extra help, often having to manage insecure housing and supporting families that are in crisis. That's why the mission that we've set out across government is so important, because it's about pulling all of that together. There is a limit to what we can expect of education in terms of what the change that can be delivered. It has to involve wider change across our society, which is why our plans around making sure we've got more security where it comes to people's ability to both own and rent a home is so important, working with Angela Rayner on that. Alongside that, child poverty, tackling child poverty is absolutely crucial, and we will work across government to do that. We'll say more as we further set out our plans around how we will deliver on our missions. But I know that one of the biggest ways we could allow teachers and school staff the time to focus on driving up standards is by tackling issues around child poverty. And one area where we want to make progress as quickly as we can is on our plans to roll out universal free breakfast clubs across our primary schools. Not just because it's a cost of living measure that will help families and allow parents more choices around work, but also the evidence is really clear about the difference that makes in terms of dealing with attendance that we've already touched on, and also around academic standards as well. So I'm keen to learn from the evidence around what will work, what will make the biggest difference. But we know we've got some big challenges, especially where it comes to child poverty. And I know that's also fueling some of the pressures that we see at the moment, where people feel that the workload is just not sustainable.
Completely. Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump to the first of our questions. And this question is from Sue, and she's a specialist dyslexia tutor. And she asks what your vision is for the difficult situation in the SEND system. How can we support children and young people to ensure their applications for an EHCP are successful? How can such a broken system, where so many cases are going to appeal, be fixed with the limited resources available?
So firstly, just to say, I do recognise Sue's characterisation of the broken system. As the previous Education Secretary said, it's a system that is lose, lose, lose. I know it isn't working for children and families or for schools, and there are so many pressures in the system. I want to make sure we've got a sharper focus on earlier support. That is a really important way I think we'll be able to do more. One of the first actions that I took on becoming Secretary of State was to restructure the department to better align support around SEND with our school system. And I think there's a lot more that we need to do around making sure that mainstream schools are better able to cater for children with a wide range of need. And I've heard from teachers and school staff that they feel they need more support in that area. I think there are wider reforms that will be required over time to the system, but I really want to make sure that where we make change, we get this right. And I know that whilst we have a system at the moment that just isn't working, I equally want to ensure that what where we make change, we do so having consulted, having listened, and making sure we get to a better place for children, for families, and in a way that is sustainable. But there are no quick fixes, I think, where it comes to this area, and I think people recognise that. But the commitment I give is I know we need to make progress, and we've got to make sure that that change delivers for the long run as well.
I think it's an interesting, it's an example of an area which requires both. I think ultimately probably there'll be some legislation and there'll be some things that will come out of the department, but this is also about practice in schools and in our earlier settings in HE, the whole system kind of organising itself to serve all of the children. I think one of the things that I think is quite liberating, you mentioned more children being able to be educated in their local school, and I think it's quite liberating to think about the types of things that teachers and support staff might do to support pupils with additional educational needs are going to support all children. And so having that vision of kind of great teaching that is really inclusive, I think really helps. And then I think the other thing that maybe we haven't had so much, and I think something that we can do as a sector, is to think more broadly and ambitiously about what a good life looks like. So we do care about, and it's back to the both and, we do care about academic outcomes, we do care about children really being able to realise their potential, but we can also think broadly about what that looks like for all of our young people. And I think having a system that is really focused on that sense of dignity, that sense of a rich life and a good life, I think will help us to kind of navigate the difficult choices that we have to make. The second question is from Jo, and she asks whether you have plans to change any of the early years funding entitlements.
We're determined to deliver on the plans that have been set out. We want to make it work, and part of the reason that we've set out our plans around more nurseries within primary schools is to make sure that we're delivering the places that are required. I know that there are big gaps across the country. There are too many areas where we don't have the provision of places that's needed. I think overall we need to make sure we better integrate early years in education into the wider system. I know that there is a big challenge there, not just around making sure we are able to recruit more people into the sector, but then that longer term question about training and progression. I was at my very first visit that I did as Secretary of State was to an early years setting, and I know how passionate people are in early years about the work that they are doing and the value that they bring, and how it is a place where you can make such a big difference to children's life chances, but a feeling that that hasn't been recognised or valued in the way that it should be. So I think we need a sea change in terms of the approach that we take, but absolutely I want to make sure that parents can access entitlements alongside that, because it is about parents having options around working, but fundamentally it's about life chances for children.
Completely. One of the things I had a fantastic day on Friday, and I was talking to a former colleague, or a colleague who has, she talked about having had a midlife crisis, and her midlife crisis came when her daughter went to university, and she had worked in early year settings for years, and she decided that she was also going to go to university. That was 4 years ago, and she's just achieved her QTS. And so she will be going and teaching, but what's in a way sad is that she'll be going and teaching in year one. So she's absolutely passionate about early years. She'll still be working in Key Stage 1, but I think finding ways, as you mentioned, for that fantastic workforce to be able to grow, to be able to develop professionally, and to be able to carry on working with children of that age and not be in a position where progression in their careers and the opportunity to have a greater impact is not able to always happen in the settings that they're working in, I know is something that would be great to be able to bring about in the next period. And
that comes up time and again whenever I visit earlier settings. I've heard that loud and clear. Absolutely.
Fantastic. The third question is from Fran Martin, and she asks if the government plans to revisit the role of Ofsted.
Yes. So what we set out ahead of the election and what we are determined to deliver is an end to the one-word judgments and a move to a report card system. Again, with a big change like that, we want to make sure that we get it right, and that we recognise the strengths that a school has, but alongside that, areas for improvement and how they can be supported to improve. That's partly why we're starting to set up plans on regional school improvement teams to make sure that schools have got what they need in order to continue to drive up standards. So, and alongside that, I think we also need to take a different approach where it comes to introduce annual reviews of safeguarding, taking account of issues such as as absence, off-rolling, and other areas. But I have heard, I've heard what the feeling across the sector about the need for reform. Alongside that, I want to make sure it involves a push to continue to improve, because I think what everyone wants is an accountability system that ensures that schools have got the support they need to continue to improve. But alongside that, we're making sure that children are getting absolutely the best start in life, and that matters particularly where it comes to children who are growing up in communities that experience different levels of disadvantage.
I think one of the other things that feels like we have a moment around is, you mentioned there's lots of fantastic work already happening in the sector, across settings. And one of the things that there's been a real push on in the last kind of 10, 12 years is around curriculum, is around kind of quality of teaching, is around evidence. I think Ofsted's played a really important role in that. I think there are probably levers that as a system we haven't pulled sharply, and you've mentioned that kind of wider experience that young people have that builds that sense of belonging. I think that kind of work with parents. So part of maybe of that work with Ofsted will be kind of looking again at how we define what a great school is, because I think maybe we're not taking account of the impact that schools can have, not just for the young people, but also for their wider communities and the role they can play in that community. Do you think, is that fair kind of?
Yeah, and I think it's important also to take a view as to the wider range of services that are available within an area. Of course, the importance of the school, but Ofsted has a wider role in terms of understanding the services and support that's available for children and young people. I think we could better join those together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, the fourth question is from Rosie Fern, who says, I was very pleased to hear the Secretary of State mention the importance of colleges and skills in his first speech from Downing Street. Sorry, that was the Prime Minister. What plans are there to address the historical underfunding of this important part of the education sector that will play a critical part in enabling the government's growth agenda? So it's about kind of the funding of colleges in post-16.
Yeah. So I do recognise that comment. I hear it time and again when I visit colleges across the country, and I was at it was a real privilege to visit Sheffield College on Friday and to see the work that they're doing there. Again, go back to where we started. I can't make commitments that I'm not absolutely confident I can deliver on. But part of why we have made both the central mission of our government is we need to grow our economy in order that we can invest in our public services. And this is where you have the neat overlap with skills, because our colleges will be part of how we also create the skills that we need that will then further fuel the growth that we need. So it's all of that working together. I do think our colleges have got a really important role in driving forward our ambitions around growth, but also the fact that how we create more well-paid, highly skilled jobs in every corner of our country. Now, that is about our young people, but it's also about adult retraining opportunities as well. I think there is more that we can do with the plans that we'll set out over time around apprenticeship levy reform, as well as the important contribution that our colleges will have as part of Skills England, and making sure that we're joining together that landscape across skills, but also joining it together across government. Because what I've also heard from colleges time and again is that the wider funding pressure is also just the range, the way in which so much is scattered, and we need greater coordination of the skills landscape, and that's what we want to make sure happens.
And I think definitely kind of at a local level, that kind of coordination. I mean, I think it feels to many of us that we're not taking advantage of the opportunities around apprenticeships. You mentioned the apprenticeship levy in particular, and sort of the opportunities to join up in local places, colleges, schools, post-60 employers and universities, and to create that sense of a shared sort of vision and a shared strategy. Because I think while there are those funding shortfalls, I think there's something about how we can kind of organise ourselves around the needs and the opportunities in a local place to maximise the investments that we're making and to maximise the return of those. Yeah,
and I'm keen to work with, we now have more regional mayors than we had before. I'm keen to work because there will be work with them, because there will be different opportunities in different parts of our country, and I think many of our regional mayors will be well placed to work with us to respond to that.
Fantastic. Next question is around what are the new government's plans with regard to multi-academy trusts?
So our focus will be on making sure we drive up standards right across the board, regardless of the school. What we have set out ahead of the election, and we will hold to, is bringing maths within the framework of Ofsted inspections. I do think that is an important step. We want to make sure we get that right. I appreciate the need to get that right. I do think it needs to happen. But I want to make sure that regardless of the name above the door, that the school is delivering a brilliant education. for our children. And I think the pressures that are faced right across our schools are the same, whether it's recruitment and retention, support for children with SEND, child poverty, as we talked about. Those are some of the commonalities. But I want to work with people across the sector to make sure we are driving up those standards.
Fantastic, fantastic. Rachel asks, teaching assistants are really crucial in supporting our most vulnerable children in mainstream schools. How will you support, Rachel mentions kind of funding in schools to ensure we don't have to continue to cut such a valuable resource, but I suppose there's a wider question about supporting that really important part of our workforce.
Yeah, our teaching assistants and our support staff workforce are absolutely crucial, and we know we can't do it without them. And that's what I hear from teachers and school leaders as well. They recognise the major contribution that our support staff make. That's why we've set out plans to bring back the school support staff negotiating body. I want to make sure that our support staff have got a seat at the table and their voice is heard in a way that it hasn't been for a very, very long time. I also think we can have a conversation as well about training and progression. I think there are some opportunities there as well. So there is wider pressure where it comes to speech and language services. I know that there is a need to make progress working with health colleagues on that. But we're determined to expand the Nellie programme, looking at speech and language support, and I think our support staff working with our teaching workforce have got an important role to play. That's just one example where I know they've played a valuable role, and I think there is the opportunity to do more, but we need to do this in a more coordinated way, and that's partly what the school support staff negotiating body will seek to do around terms and conditions and progression.
I'm increasingly sure that there is such an opportunity to enable this amazing group of people to do more. I'm thinking in our community, we've taken a group of people, the early years leader that I spoke about earlier, and through to a degree, and those people are now in teaching roles, but they're also in other important roles in the system where they're able to have a greater impact and they're able to progress themselves. And in a world where, I think we haven't necessarily quite got right that kind of work-based progression, and where we've got people who've got amazing expertise and experience, and they can do more. And if we're thinking about kind of the mental health workforce, or we're thinking about 2,000 social work vacancies, I think there are in London at the moment, if we're thinking about the 6,500 teachers, I'm absolutely convinced that there are opportunities to build the expertise and enable that group of people to do even more work than they're already doing.
I think there are lots of opportunities. I think what I would just add to that is that I want to do that with the workforce. I know that there are lots of pressures at the moment. I know therefore the prospect of being asked to do more is tough, but I want to do it in consultation. I want to do it together. I want to make sure that where we deliver change, it's in partnership, we get it right, because I do know that people feel under enormous pressure right across education at the moment. Understood.
Absolutely. Thank you, Secretary of State. The next question is from Nick, and he asks, how quickly will the review of the curriculum start? Maybe you could talk a bit more about kind of your vision for that review and how you see it kind of unfolding and the kind of timeframes around it.
Yeah. So I do think it's right that we look again at curriculum assessment. I think that has to be done across the span of compulsory education rather than singling out different parts of the system. And to go back to our earlier conversation, I think it is possible and essential actually that we continue to drive high standards in our schools, but that we get that breadth alongside it too. Where it comes to a kind of overall vision for it, it's making sure that our children and young people are prepared for life, for work, for their futures, and making sure that we deliver reform that stands the test of time. I appreciate again the need to get this right, to do it thoroughly. That's why we will have an expert-led review with terms of reference published to accompany that, and I hope to be able to say more on that before too long.
Great. And one of the things, we've talked a little bit about early years, which is, I think, a favourite topic for both of us, but it's interesting that we have an early years assessment system and an early years curriculum that does have that breadth, and it's baked in, and the prime areas and the focus on building relationships and the focus on speaking and listening and kind of making relationships. We have that breadth early on in the curriculum, and then things narrow quite quickly. So it feels like there's some insights to gain from within the system actually about how things might develop across the rest of the compulsory schooling.
Yes, I agree, and I think alongside that, I want the review to be able to build on the expertise already out there. it's about making sure we're building on what works and on expanding that range of opportunity for our young people. I do just want to reassure people that will be the focus of the review, to make sure that we do recognise the expertise and work that has gone on over many years. I know teachers have put a lot of work into continuing to develop as professionals. I want to recognise that. I want to make sure the review builds on that.
So we're not going to have a dramatic change of direction. It's going to build on what's already there in terms of the work that's gone on to really create that kind of knowledge-rich curriculum. But it will be about kind of adding to that and supplementing it and developing it further. Is that fair?
I want to build on what is working, but making sure we've not just got that breadth, but also that it's keeping pace with the change in our times.
Fantastic. Alison asks if the government is going to review behaviour management approaches in school, given high levels of exclusions, suspensions, mental health issues and attendance difficulties, and move to more relationship-based behaviour management approaches.
So I think this is one area where I think on day 12 in the job, it's an area that I want to look at in more detail. I appreciate there is a range of opinion on how we manage all of that within the system. I've heard directly from teachers and support staff about some of the pressures they're under at the moment, the impact that behaviour can have on not just their experience in the workforce, but also on wider classrooms, on the ability of other young people to learn. But I'd be keen to look right across the board at this issue, because there are a number of things that are going on here. And I think it's about, some of those pressures that were just set out there around mental health that is having an impact. And I do know that lots of young people at the moment are finding life hard, and so are their families, and that has a wider impact where it comes to attendance. But I think this is an area where I would want to look carefully and make sure that we get the response right.
And I think this is another of those areas where I think we've got into a very polarised debate. And I think for the vast majority of us working in the system, the nuance is that kind of, we want to have those relational approaches, and at times, it is appropriate to use sanctions. And so I think it's one of those things where I'm sure as you spend more time in schools and in colleges and in earlier settings, you'll see that kind of practitioners all over the country are navigating that system and figuring out what's the right thing. And I think, again, continuing to kind of have that conversation and help us all to figure out the right way through, and also to build expertise and capacity to be able to support with all of the challenges that you've mentioned young people are facing at the same time.
Absolutely. And I would just add, obviously it is important that school leaders retain the ability to make decisions within local context and about what's right for their school and right for their community, as well as where it comes to the individual. So that is important. And I want to make sure that government is setting a better tone so that schools can better manage those relationships, because I know that there is also, along with the fracturing that I believe we've seen where it comes to the relationship between the previous government and the sector, I know that many schools are finding it hard at the minute with that fractured relationship where it comes to families and wider communities. And that's because of that wider pressure that lots of people are experiencing at the moment: cost of living, child poverty, insecure housing, and schools are having to step in and pick all of that up. But that does come at a cost.
And I think I don't know if other people would agree with this, but I would say that over the last kind of couple of weeks, I feel like that tone has changed, and I think there's something about from the top. I mean, one of the things that's tough about working in our sector is that we're on the front line, right? We're the public leaders that are visible, teachers, head teachers, early years leaders, college leaders. We're the ones who are there, and I think probably frustration that people have felt about the way things have evolved, the challenges around the pandemic, issues of trust, etc. I think those have played out a lot in schools. I think it comes back to what I was saying about Ofsted, where probably we haven't, as a system, invested enough in storytelling and the relationship building in our communities about the opportunities around education. And so I think as we kind of go into this new phase, the kind of reset that you're talking about, there's probably an opportunity to do a bit of that more widely. For all of us in our communities to kind of refocus on the opportunities that we want for our young people, on that sense of partnership, both with families, with communities, and also with the wider kind of system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Couple of questions that I'm going to kind of pull together. One from Kevin, which was about early years staff, and one from Joe, and both of them are around retention. How do we retain teachers? How do we retain support staff? How do we retain early years staff? How do we make sure that people who are joining the profession want to stay in it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I recognise that there is a question about pay, which we've partly covered earlier, but what I hear when I'm out and about across the sector is, whilst pay is a concern for many people, it's many of those wider workload pressures that are what, you know, that's forcing people out or feel they don't want to continue. So it's partly about how we respond to workload. I appreciate there was some work that had gone on in the previous government. I want to look afresh at how we respond to workload pressures. But alongside that, I think it's about recognising the different roles that each of us have within the system. So for me, about a government that creates the conditions where schools are under less pressure, our earlier staff are under less pressure. If we can tackling child poverty, you know, bearing down on the pressures that exist at the moment around housing, all the mental health, making sure we've got more mental health support, that we're giving children access to earlier intervention where that's required. The fact that all of that feels so difficult at the moment, I think is part of what is making it very difficult to work within education, and that will take us time to resolve. It will take us time to get things right. But the commitment I give is I want to make working in education, whether that's in the early years or schools or our social work profession, I want to ensure that right across the board, we value and invest in the people that deliver for us. And I know that there are pressures that are particularly acute at the moment in certain parts of the sector, and we're determined to get it right. Absolutely.
And I think one of the things, again, I think this is another area where, again, I think you and the department can set the tone, but I also think there's opportunities for all of us. I mean, like with some of the groups of schools that we're working with around kind of developing this kind of coherence and a kind of cradle to career approach, we can all go out and do that mapping, understand who are the agencies, who are the organisations, who are the third sector organisations in our communities who can offer that support, and make it easier for our families to access the support that they need, make it easier for those transitions points between kind of nursery and school, primary, secondary post 16 and beyond, help families to navigate those and help young people to navigate those more easily. And part of that is us kind of, and again, recognising that there's a lot of pressure, but finding space and time to go and have those conversations, meet those people, kind of understand the local kind of ecosystem, and then build those relationships that can make it easier for all of us to do our job. I think probably it hasn't been easy to do that, and we haven't probably as a system been encouraged to do that, and I sense there's an invitation from you to go out and make those connections across sectors. You've mentioned housing earlier, some of those health systems, yes, that can where you'll be doing that at a national level, but for us locally, we can go out and build those relationships and start to have those conversations and understand where we might have a common agenda and what the opportunities might be to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I have the privilege of being able to go out about as much as I can on visits right across the education sector, and I do see some brilliant work that goes on. And the frustration I have is how we make sure that some of that can be more widely shared, and how we here in the department are able to expand where there is good work, where we can look to expand that further, and where people across education can not just collaborate more, but can also build on kind of developing practice from colleagues. And that does apply kind of across sectors, because I think there are linkages there too, as you've just described. Completely.
Thank you. Jana asks about, it's another budget question, another finance question, but it's about local authority funding, and will additional budget be made available to local authorities to support education? Can you talk a little bit about kind of your vision for the role of local authorities in the system and how you see that obviously being funded, but how you see that developing?
So, alongside education, I know that there are lots of pressures that our local authorities are under at the moment. The commitment that we'd set out was to a multi-year settlement, because we want to make sure that councils have got the ability to plan a bit longer term, to make, you know, stronger decisions that will endure rather than short-term one-off sticking plaster decisions. So that's the approach that we'll take. At the moment, we're, of course, as a very new government, working with colleagues across different departments to join up our approach and to look to the funding challenges that we're facing at the moment. But again, I do have to be upfront about this. The situation of the fiscal inheritance is dire. It's really, really challenging. But I think there are some areas where we can seek to make progress that will not just, that isn't simply just about how we make better use of taxpayers' money. That's important, but also where we can, in so doing, deliver better life chances for children too. So we'll be setting out further plans, for example, around children's social care, because I think, again, I've been concerned about the emergence of very expensive placements, but not just that, the fact that we're not delivering a great start for children and young people who often have experienced considerable distress and turbulence in their lives, and that's where government has to step in to make sure that they are supported to thrive.
Fantastic. There's a final question or a comment from Sarah, and she asks you to please celebrate our workforce and support the public to recognise the great work that's done every day. What have been some of the things we've talked about a number of these, and you've talked about this thing, but what makes you optimistic about coming into this role? What gives you confidence that we can achieve the things that you're aspiring to achieve?
Yeah, I think that message is exactly right. I appreciate it's probably easier for those of you working in the sector to deliver that message than for it to come from a politician. And I think that is where it is about working together. And I think I want to hear those voices. And I think we will need, there's a lot that government needs to do to make being in education a better place for the workforce. But I am continually impressed by the dedication, the commitment of staff working often in quite challenging circumstances, but delivering day in, day out. And it would be, it would be wrong to single out one or two. I've just met so many people, both in, the 2.5 years that I spent as Shadow Education Secretary, which has given me the opportunity to really understand how the system works and some ideas for how we can take things forward. But now as Education Secretary, and I'm keen to be out across the country as often as I can be, not just sat here in the department, and engaging with the workforce right across education. We won't always get things right. I'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes. There'll be ups and downs along the way, but the commitment that I give to everyone is that I am genuine and sincere in saying that the change that I want to deliver and the change that the government wants to deliver can only be done working with the amazing people across education.
I have to tell you a story because I had an emotional moment today. So I was running a conference, and it was at a school I used to work at, Burlington Danes Academy over in White City. And as I was walking up to where we were running the event, there was a board, and it was the Leavers in 2030 and where they'd gone. And I looked up and I saw a group of students who I taught a phonics recovery program to this group of students in Year 7. And I saw all these amazing destinations. They'd gone on to SOAS, they'd gone on to great apprenticeships, they'd gone to all these different universities, great destinations. And I think that's one thing about, and I think it's an invitation, I think, to schools and to stay in touch with our alumni and kind of reconnect with them and be able to show us and point to us those examples of young people. You talked about your own teacher, Miss Huck, but giving us an opportunity to reconnect with those young people and seeing where they end up. And then I bumped into 2 colleagues who have been at Burlington Danes Academy for more than 20 years, like really serving that community, helping to shape that community, helping to strengthen that community. And that also gave me a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. So it was a really exciting day for me before coming here. We've had more than 3,000 questions, so thank you so much, everybody, for your participation. We're going to wrap it up there. We recognise it's a super busy time of year for everybody. Any closing remarks that you'd like to share with everybody before we wrap?
Just to say a big thank you to all of those who've been able to join this afternoon. Hopefully this is the first of many opportunities where you'll have the chance to put questions directly to me. We're also looking very closely and carefully about how we can do this on face-to-face basis as well, out there across the country. So really look forward to meeting with as many of you as I can in the weeks and months to come, but we'll make sure that we've reviewed all of the questions and the comments that people have left. And just thanks so much. I appreciate your time. It's really valuable, and I hope that you found this afternoon a useful opportunity.